I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, here with Vincent René-Lortie, the Oscar-nominated director of Invincible, which is nominated in the live-action short category. And Vincent, before we start going in about the film, there's a great video on YouTube of you and your friends and your team reacting to hearing the Oscar nomination. And I know that this film this is like almost like just the release of this film has been like a multi-year journey to get to this point. So what was that moment like?
I was totally crazy. I'm not gonna lie. First, I don't think we were really expecting it. Like just the fact that we were in the shortlist was already like a big achievement for all of us. But when we all met together that morning, the production team, there was also one of the actor and the distributor and everything. So but it was all the family that worked on that film for the past, let's say, 2 years after we finished shooting it. But yeah, it was just like a very emotional moment. Like we worked really hard on that and it was, you saw the video, we cried, we screamed, we jumped in each other's arm, and that video was probably like 15 minutes longer. We just cut it like 30 seconds, but I don't think we stopped. Like I remember like that moment was such a beautiful emotional moment. Yeah.
So this film is in particular, very personal for you because it's very much based on a friend that you knew growing up. And it also shows, I think, something that is very common no matter where you're from, that the kind of mental health struggles that are becoming increasingly common among young people. So how did you decide that this story was going to really be the vehicle for this film?
Yeah. I mean, that I think that so it's the true story of a friend that passed away when he was 14 years old. And so when this incident happened, I was very young myself. I was the same age, so I don't think I really understood what really happened. Like it took me many years, until probably like 6 or 7 years ago, to I knew that story was very close to my heart. I knew that there was still some unfinished thing about that story, something that I didn't really understand, how this whole thing happened, what really happened, and actually who was my friend the year before he passed away, because I got, a little bit far away from him because he was in a juvenile center. So I started to do a lot of research, and one of the first thing that happened in the discussion that I had with his father actually was that, this idea that it was maybe more a suicide than an accident came up during our discussion. And so, that kind of moment when he told me that, it was kind of a big moment of like realization. I understood that maybe I didn't really understood my friend, didn't really know him really well. And so I decided to do a lot of research. From that moment, I had many meetings with them, but also with friends of him at the time, with people working at a juvenile center, police officer as well, like a lot of people, just to gather as much information as I could. And in that process, I understood that yes, that there was something going on with my friend that was more related to mental health. And I think that the important moment before he passed away was really before, in the last 48 hours before that moment, because that's where there was a change in his life. That's where there was the kind of a fracture in his brain, I guess, not his brain, but in his emotion in many ways. So that's why I decided to make a film about that moment. And yes, mental health is like, it became as the subject of the film. I've never wanted to be like, this is a film about mental health. I just think it's a kid that goes through different stage of emotion, and through that we understand that he's not going well internally. He's fighting demons, he's fighting things that a lot of people around him are having a hard time to really understand. And so that's why I guess like the subject of mental health came along, and also a lot of the viewing, like a lot of people that came to see me after viewing, or like, yeah, I knew people like him, or I was him when I was younger. And so yeah, I guess it's a long answer, but I guess I answer your question.
No, but and so I guess what I want to know also is to have a personal story like this be the subject of this film. Was there ever concern on your part that maybe this was too personal? Were you
Mhm.
able to kind of still look at it objectively as a filmmaker and distance yourself from the personal aspect, or were the two just meshed?
That's a very good question. I think that, the thing that I understood is that once you start doing a project about something so personal, at some point in that process, after probably a year into the research, I became a little bit far away from the subject, because I needed to work on that film for almost 5 or 6 years. So if I was so involved in emotionally involved in the film, that would have been a very hard 5 or 6 years. So I think, yeah, it needs to become a film. It needs to become a fiction. It's a narrative. It's not like a documentary. So I think, like, in many ways, I became a little bit far away from the subject, and I always, with the intention of telling something true and something very honest about my friend. And I think it kind of like I the emotion really came back, and the grief came back at the first screening of the film in front of family and friend. And then from that point, it became a beautiful journey of screening it around the world. And meanwhile, kind of going through all of these stage of emotion, where I felt finally that I could maybe understood a little bit more my friend. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about some just the formal aspects of the film, because one of the things that I think you capture so beautifully is this kid kind of trapped inside of his own emotions. I feel like so many of the shots in the film convey that, whether it's the shots of him underwater or the close-ups of him in this tiny little room in the detention center. And so formally, what were some of the things that you were doing
Yeah.
to kind of tell the story in a visual way and not just in a narrative way?
Yeah, it was like it a lot of thing was visual, a lot of thing also were in the sound design. If I start with the visual, it was like, we always had the intention with the cinematographer Alexandre, who's also a very long time collaborator, to kind of like to have this idea of like to feel like the camera is really in his head and only lives in his head. And I think it's easy to say on paper, but one way of we decided to go was like, most of the film is, let's say, on a tripod, very stable. And because of the format, which is 4:3, it gave the impression that the camera was always kind of in the box, in a prison. We were very, very tight angle on his face. Like, sometimes, just the acting was hard for the actor, because he had to stay in the frame. He has to kind of like, as soon as he got a little bit far away, he weren't on the frame anymore. So it felt, even for him, that he was like stuck and he couldn't breathe. And so I think that both for the actor, but also for the viewer, it gave that impression that, like, oh my God, like, I need to get out of that. I need to get out of that. And I think that's a good, that's a good feeling when you watch the film. That's an important feeling, I would say more. And also, like, a lot of in the tones, like, we were a lot of the dark and blue tones when he's inside a juvenile center, but when he's outside of that, it's much more warmer, wider as well, camera wise. And in the sound, there's much more wind. It's very like more like, I guess, yeah, it feels like nature too when he's outside. When he's inside, it's like almost silent. And I have like actually this weird kind of, um it was hard to see my film on a big screen in a theater full of people, because these moments when he's, for example, in his bedroom, there's almost no sound at all, so you hear everybody in the room breathing and kind of like and going through these emotion too while watching the film. And so but I'm actually glad of that effect. But it was kind of, it became it became real when I saw the film for the first time, on a big screen. So yeah, all of these technical decision were always made, like always thinking, okay, what would it be if we were in his head at that moment?
Yeah, and this young actor is so perfect in this role and has to go to some very dark places. And
Yeah.
so how did you work with him?
Mm. Um, and just to do a kind of um, to go back also just on your previous question and to link to the main character is that like I think that the fact that the main actor was so good allowed us also to be very close to his face. And so Lil Kim was 15 years old when we filmed that when we shot that film, and it was his first time acting. So we worked a lot and before the film, meaning like we met each other for almost like 2 months, I think maybe even more than 2 months. Every week he drove to Montreal with his mother like 2 hours just to see me, and we worked together on the film. And I wouldn't say that we rehearsal of this scene. It wasn't really about that. We talked about the script, we talked about the character and the real Mark, the real the real person behind the story. But we also talked a lot about emotion because I was curious, like at his age, like how did he perceive emotion, like hate, like anger, like joy and emotion like that. Because when we got on set, it was so much more easier to discuss with him and have this kind of like very easy way to talk about emotion on set. And so the communication were so easy on set with him that my job was really more to like work with the team and discuss with the team and talk with my cinematographer and art director. But like he he were so ready when we got on set. And for me that was the most beautiful part of the process. I was really, really proud of that for him. I was really proud of him because he carried the film on his shoulder for almost 30 minutes. And I think for someone of his age, it's very impressive. Yeah.
I also I think one of the things that's so important about the movie is that it's not a stereotypical portrayal of someone in a mental health crisis. I feel like in a lot of films, mental health is portrayed,
Yeah.
with certain behaviors rather than it being something that's just, you know, ingrained. And he has so many looks on his face in any
Yeah.
given moment that it almost reflects the fact that his brain is firing on all cylinders and not always in the best way.
Yeah, I think that like as much as I wanted the camera and the visual and to be a way to like see the world through his eyes, I think that my one of my intention too was to understand how his parents or how his the people around him had a really hard time to reach him and to understand him at that time. And I think that the viewer also has that same kind of experience while when they watch the movie. I don't think we force any emotion, and that's what I'm saying here. I think that like it's kind of a film where it's about someone growing through something, and it's like now how do you interpret and how do you see what that kid is going through, and that's how I think mental health came in the discussion. But it's like I think that I would say it's maybe why it's more the subtle part of mental health, more the subtle part of these emotion, which I think is the reality in real life. I don't think you're almost like you're always either crying or angry or sad. I think there's a lot of joy and a lot of moment where people around you they look at you and they see someone who's doing well, and so yeah, it was important for me to kind of like to be on that subtle kind of margin.
So, you go through this and you get all this acclaim and the Oscars coming up. Um, how do you feel about, the about March 10th? How when you see March 10th on the calendar, what do you think about?
Yeah, you should have seen my arm when you said that. It's like goosebumps when I just think about the fact that we're going to the Oscars. I don't think I didn't start to really understand what's going on, honestly. Um, it's you know I think as a kid I'm from Canada, so it's not very far from, you know, Los Angeles and you know, the United States. Like as a kid, you grew up and I watch the Oscars like almost every year, and it becomes kind of like that faraway dream, but also all of these idols, all of these people you watch on TV, they did some of my best films, some of my best cinema. So just the idea now that we're going there is both a dream, a childhood dream, but it's also a little bit intimidating. And I'm like, okay, like what's the next step? Like, you know, I how do I approach this? And you know, with my little first indie short film, like it's very surreal. It's very surreal to be here. And I've been going through this emotion since I heard the announcement last Tuesday. I see next the March 10 as just I want to enjoy it. I want to have fun. I think this whole thing is also a little bit stressful, and but I don't want to have too much stress on my shoulder. I just want to have fun and see how this goes.
So but just in terms of you as a filmmaker, has this whole experience, you know, opened up new opportunities for you? Are you working on thinking about future projects?
Yeah, I think I was lucky enough to like start working on my first feature film while distributing the film. A year ago, I started to work on a first feature film. Um, I'm actually co-writing it with a friend, and it's a beautiful process that I think it's actually probably a good timing that I'm here right now, because I think that as soon as like, you know, the Oscars are finished, or I can just like jump on that next film and continue writing it and finding the good partners to do it. I think that like it's a little early to know how this experience will open new doors, but like I think it's definitely, you know, good, I think, to have a project now, because I'm also a little bit like I was a little bit about like a little bit worried about what happened after, you know, what happened after March 10. But now I'm reassured about that.
Well, Vincent, congratulations. I mean, it's such a great film, and I hope everybody gets a chance to see it. Best of luck at the Oscars. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming Oscars, and stay tuned for interviews with more nominees in the coming weeks. Vincent René-Lortie, a real pleasure. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you.